March is a phenomenal month for seed starting in Zone 5, Wisconsin, especially if you love your brassicas. Guten gardening, everybody! Well, it's mid-March here in Zone 5, Wisconsin, and the seed starting is really ramping up. Now, last month we did a video where we talked about the seeds we were starting in February in Zone 5, and this month we're going to follow that up with seeds that we're starting in March, and we're going to try to keep that going throughout the next couple of months as we prepare for spring. So today, we've got quite a few great vegetables to get started, especially if you, like us, love your brassicas. So we're going to walk through the planting of 8 different vegetables, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each one that we're starting right now. Now, if you didn't see our last video, I'm going to just tell you right now that we use a homemade seed starting mix. This is a mixture of cocoa cure, peat moss, and perlite. And we've created a finer mix using a strainer so that the seeds have an easier time getting started. I'll also let you know that the containers that we're starting these in, we're going to have a link to down in the description. These have been really handy for us because they come with their own humidity dome, and you can choose whether you want lights built in or not. Both setups have worked really well for us, but these are what we're going to use for most of our seeds today, except for our tomatoes, and I'll explain why when we get there. Oh, and one more thing. 2 years ago in March, we released a video that's very detailed on this exact topic, so you can go back and check that out if you need more details. All right, the first set of seeds that we're going to be planting today are our broccoli seeds, and for those of you that were involved in our seed share, a large number of you got a little packet of Waltham broccoli seeds just like this. Waltham happens to be one of my favorite varieties, but we're also going to be planting some Romanesco broccoli again this year. One of the coolest looking vegetables out there in my opinion. And actually, I just saw this in the local grocery store 2 days ago. So this is a really cool, if you ever get the chance to grow Romanesco broccoli, you got to check that out. Now, broccoli is a cool weather crop, so it's important to get it out when it's nice and cool. It likes those temperatures between 60 and 80 degrees, but we can plant it now, and I'm going to put 3 seeds in each one of these little cubes. But we can plant it now, and then we can also do a fall planting as well. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of germination, we like to keep the temperature as close to 75 degrees Fahrenheit as possible. So we keep that temperature. It's not as warm as some of our other plants, but it's a pretty mid-level temperature. Germination takes between 10 to 14 days, so about 2 weeks for germination for these seeds, and our goal is to have these outdoors by mid-April. These are frost hardy, so that's something you can keep in mind, especially for those of you in the cooler growing zones. I imagine it's a good bit harder to grow these in the warmer growing zones. Hey, as always, I'm going to be labeling exactly what I'm planting, especially since I'm going to have Waltham broccoli here and my Romanesco. By the way, I may show you just one container of planting, but that doesn't mean that that's the only space where we're planting our seeds. And as always, when I label my seeds, I put the date where I planted them as well, so I can keep in mind if there are any issues because they're not coming up. All right, check out these Romanescos one more time. I've said it probably 4 or 5 times in videos. I think they look like a math problem, like the Fibonacci sequence. It's such a cool looking plant. All right, the depth for these seeds are somewhere between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. You can see I've got about 3/8 of an inch or so of depth here at the top of the potting mix that I added into here. So I'm going to just cover these up instead of digging a hole for them. I just need to cover them up as or after they've been planted. I think that just makes things easier for me. So we've got our first tray here of our Romanesco broccoli, and yes, we will thin this down as they start to germinate, hopefully get a couple of plants per. And while this mix is already a little bit damp, what I don't always show you is I water these underneath, and it's absorbing the water up through the mix as well. So again, we typically bottom water to try to prevent any kind of algae or any kind of other pests getting to our mix or any mold or anything like that. But I'm just going to add that nice layer to the top. So we've got, again, probably about 3/8 of an inch of depth here for those seeds. And I'm going to go ahead and put the humidity dome on top of this, the one with the light. I'll show you what that looks like if you didn't see our previous video. This is a really cool setup. And then I'm going to get started on the next vegetable. So here's one of the cool things. These are some of our peppers. You sort of see a comparison here. These are Praxis peppers. And then these are the ones that we harvested from last year's crop here at Guten Gardening. You see how much better these are performing? But one of the nice things is, after these germinate, I can take the top off for these and use the humidity dome then for my next, like these broccoli here, my next plants that I'm starting off. This is the light variety here, the one that has the light on the inside of the humidity dome. And here's what it looks like once it's plugged in. You see that light shining on there? I'll pull it off one more time. There you go, built-in lighting. Even though I have additional lighting here, built-in lighting. Let's move on to our second vegetable. All right, next up we've got our Brussels sprouts. And in terms of durability, one of the things we love about brassicas is they can handle the cool weather of Zone 5 no problem at all. And we've gone out and harvested some really sweet Brussels sprouts covered in snow. This year we're planting two different varieties. One of them the red rubine or rubine Brussels sprout, and the other one is the green. This is just a Groninger Brussels sprout. Both of these have performed well for us in the past. Both of these very delicious. The size of the seeds on these is very similar to the broccoli. They are brassicas together after all. So we want that same 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch depth. And again, I'm going to be planting 3 in each one of these squares. Now our goal is to get these out in mid-April as well. Remember, they can handle a frost, and so we're not too worried if they get some of those colder temperatures. Now, both of these varieties are somewhere between 80 to 110 days to maturity, but it takes about 5 to 12 days for the seeds to germinate. So I'm gonna come back to that idea of please remember to label the start date for your seeds. As often as you can remember to do that, you're gonna be better off because you're going to know what's happening faster. Now remember, timing is very important for vegetables like this that enjoy the cooler weather, because if you're still hoping for a lot of the development to occur in the middle of the summer, the heat of the summer, you're going to be sorely disappointed with your Brussels sprouts. All right, I'm going to interrupt the video very briefly and ask you a question. Leave a comment and let me know which brassica is your favorite brassica. If we had to have a competition between all of them, which one would you choose? All right, next up we've got our cabbage. And cabbage is a vegetable that I like to eat on tacos. Now, I just had this discussion recently at my workplace trying to decide which vegetable was better on tacos, lettuce or cabbage. Let us know what you think in the comments. Now, we may add other varieties as well, but for now we've got this early Jersey Wakefield cabbage and this Red Hawk hybrid cabbage. Both of these are pretty quick growing. We're looking at somewhere between 60 and 80 days for our cabbage. And you'll often see cabbage germinating between 5 to 10 days. It likes about a 75-degree temperature to germinate. And then once it's outside, it really likes temperatures between 50 and 75 degrees. So again, this is another one of those cool weather vegetables. That's important to remember. Now, I don't know about you, but our personal experience has been that we've had more success and gotten bigger heads of cabbage from green cabbage as opposed to our red cabbage. Let us know, what has your experience been? Have you done really well with your red cabbages? And we had a green cabbage a couple years ago that had 3 heads on it. I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, that's some pretty good eating off there. We're going to give these seeds about a 1/4 inch of depth once we cover it over and get these started. And I do think it's important to remember that you plant the number of vegetables that you actually think you're going to need. Maybe overplant a little bit, because the seeds are a lot less expensive than the value of the time it might take to try to start all over if you don't get a good enough germination. But you plant the number based on your space and the needs your family has for the particular vegetable. All right, next up we have an absolute garden staple, and that's our kale. All right, the 2 varieties we're going to be planting right now are our Red Russian, and then this is some of our Dino kale, our lacinato kale. And I got to tell you that the Red Russian kale has performed so well for us. I think that actually has become a staple as well, especially in our outdoor garden. But curly leaf kale, prism kale, there's so many different varieties of kale to be planted, and they're such a hardy example of a brassica. Again, we're in zone 5, and I sing the praises of kale every single time I plant it, but we've had this grow for us 8 or 9 months out of the year outdoors here in Zone 5, Wisconsin. Once again, I'm planting 3 seeds per, and this is a great example of a plant that I'm planting way more than just this amount of, because we put this throughout our entire garden, but I'm not going to show you every single tray that I'm going to be planting. This is a 1/4 inch depth again for our seeds here. Our goal is to get this outdoors, again, mid-April. This likes that cooler weather as well. It's going to take probably 5 to 7 days for these seeds to germinate, so we'll see them coming up pretty quickly. And it likes a temperature of around 70 degrees during germination. Now, when I mention optimal temperatures for germination, you can still get germination if you don't acquire those temperatures. If you don't have the warmth, you can still get germination. This is just how you're going to get the fastest and hopefully better overall results for germination. All right, next up we've got cauliflower. And cauliflower is interesting because we mostly see the white cauliflower at the store, but there are actually quite a few different varieties and cool colors of cauliflower available. So I got a couple of different colors that I'm going to be planting this year. This is a green macerata. This is a purple graffiti cauliflower, and our flame star, which is a yellow cauliflower. And of course, I'm going to plant a traditional white, which is this snowball cauliflower as well from Praxis Seeds, one of the few Praxis Seeds left out there based on what I'm hearing. How many of you have eaten one of these other colors of cauliflower before? I wonder if it's kind of like what happens. You remember when they made that purple and green ketchup for a while? The taste was the same, or supposedly it was the same, but I couldn't wrap my mind around eating that. Well, what do you think? Purple cauliflower? Now I'm going to plant 1 row of each of these, and I am definitely going to have to plant some additional cauliflower. I'm not going to leave it up to just one little container because I do enjoy cauliflower. Cauliflower likes cooler temperatures outside, but when it comes to germination, it likes about 80 degrees. So it's good to have a heat mat for your cauliflower. And this is going to take probably 80 to 110 days to come to full maturity. But what I found is that cauliflower, much like broccoli, will appear to not be creating a head for the longest time, and then all of a sudden it appears almost like magic and then develops nicely. And you got to remember, with cauliflower, you want to cover that head up as it starts to develop to keep it out of direct sunlight. Otherwise it will burn, and no matter what color you're looking to try to grow, you're not going to get the results you want. And I'm going to give these seeds about a 1/4 inch of depth. Now up next, we have a couple of different varieties here of sage and basil. So we're getting into the herbs before I get to the last thing that I'm going to be planting today, and there's a reason for that. Again, I'll get to that in just a second. But with sage and basil, they're a little bit different because basil will germinate in about a week, and sage can take up to 3 weeks for your seeds to germinate. But both of them are going to be planted at about a 1/4 inch, and, well, I got to tell you, our sage has lasted so long since we brought it indoors from the outside. This is our sage plant that's been around now for almost a year. We brought it indoors. It's as healthy as ever. It's got an amazing smell to it, even if you accidentally brush up against it. Now, as I mentioned, there are a bunch of different varieties of basil. I've got some Italian basil. This is called our mammoth basil, sweet basil. I'm only going to be planting a few of those right now, although we do love to harvest and dehydrate our basil. And here we have some broadleaf sage. I'm actually going to plant multiple varieties of the basil in here, and I'm going to plant just this broadleaf sage. I'm actually going to plant the sage in a separate container since it takes a lot longer to germinate, although both of them like to germinate at around 70 to 75 degrees. And we are going to give these a 1/4 inch depth. And as always, I'm putting 3 seeds in here because I don't mind thinning everything out. You know, our experience has shown that basil is so powerful that we don't need a ton of it added to any one dish. But maybe surprisingly, I like adding basil to our green smoothies. I think that tastes amazing. Now, I've saved our garden candy to last because there are just so many varieties of tomatoes to get planted and get started right now. We've got quite a bit to choose from, including a lot of the tomato seeds that we saved from last year's harvest. We had so many. So I'm going to be planting these in a 98 square setup because I've got a lot of different varieties. Now, I am going to cover this up because I don't have a standard humidity dome. I'm just going to cover this up with some plastic. I'm using one 1-gallon storage bag over top here, just cut open, and I can leave that on there until I start to see germination, and that'll act as a humidity dome because I don't want it to dry out. Now, a couple of things. If you were, again, in our seed share, you might have gotten some of these white tomatoes, which were really cool. They're not exactly a pure white color. They're a little bit off-white, but a light yellow. Really tasty. I've got a couple of these rare giant crimson tomatoes that I'm going to be planting. And, of course, I've got a large selection, just like we looked through last year. We had like 26 different varieties of tomatoes. So whenever you're considering planting tomatoes, you got to keep in mind that there are determinate, indeterminate varieties. There's a lot of selection that goes into tomatoes because it really depends on your space as to what you have room to grow. Now this is going to take me a bit to get these planted, but I want to plant them at about 1/4 of an inch deep. You can check out these seeds. Again, these are ones from last year's harvest. They kind of stick together. Sometimes you just separate them out like that. But I'm going to give it about 1/4 inch depth. And for these, I'm only going to be planting 1 seed in each square. And it's going to take about 5 to 10 days for these to germinate at about 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I think I mentioned this a minute ago, but given the fact that there are like 10,000 different varieties, literally, of tomatoes, it makes sense to shop around, to try a whole bunch of different varieties, see which ones you like the best, and then plant those. See which ones grow best on your property. These are something that we're going to get out after the last frost for sure. These do not handle the cold like our brassicas do. I should probably also mention the fact that we're probably going to get a whole bunch of volunteer plants this year anyway. We grew so many different varieties, and it's really hard to capture every single tomato before it hits the ground. So we'll likely get plenty of these anyway. What I'm planting right now was our biggest tomato last year in terms of overall size, the mortgage lifter. It's a really popular tomato, really rich and juicy. Now, just like last year, for the sake of making sauces, etc., we're going to be planting more of the larger tomatoes instead of our cherry tomatoes, but we will plant a few of these, like this white cherry tomato, because I need that when I'm walking out in the garden. I need to be able to eat some of that garden candy while I'm out there. Well, I ended up running out of markers, 3 in, and I knew I was going to, so I had a Sharpie I just wrote on the outside here for the 14 different varieties of tomatoes that I have planted in here, and I'm going to come back through once I get a couple more of these markers and add in the markers so that we don't get any loss here. But 14 different varieties of tomatoes in here, and I've got plenty more I want to plant. Let me go ahead and add that 1/4 inch of mix, and I'm going to show you what we've done today. Well, you see all that we've got accomplished here today, and I've said this before, and I 100% mean it. You all really help me out because creating a video like this helps me get a lot of work done in a relatively timely manner, and that's something I appreciate very much. Well, we hope you're getting your garden started, you're getting your seeds started. If you've never tried starting your garden from seeds before, you've always perhaps bought seedlings from somewhere else, give it a try. It's definitely worth the effort. It doesn't take a ton of time to get started, and you can end up with some really nice, healthy plants that are ready for transplant come spring. Well, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.